Welcome to Interpreting Wine's first ever series looking at the category of port. This series will bust a lot of myths about this often misunderstood beverage, discussing the history and evolution of the style, a tasting of representative styles, and an in-depth conversation with a world-famous producer. If you've ever wanted to deepen your knowledge about the world of port, then do listen on. And if you'd either like to listen to the whole series or share this series with a friend, do head to interpretingwine.com/port19. Today's episode of the Port series features world-renowned port producer Dirk Niepoort of Niepoort Vinhos. A super in-depth episode covering Dirk's thoughts on port and Douro wines in 2019. We first hear his origin story and multi-generational winemaking background. Dirk talks the health of the port market. He discusses the Douro terroir and climate change. Intergenerational learning. The 2017 vintage port. And where next for port and the Douro. Enjoy.
My name is Dirk Niepoort. I have a Dutch passport. I don't look Dutch. I don't speak Dutch. I don't really feel Dutch, but I feel Portuguese, but I don't look Portuguese. So it's kind of weird. I'm the fifth generation in Portugal, and my family has been doing port for some generations, and we were negociants, so we didn't own any vineyards. We bought the ports from small growers, and that has changed a little bit since 1987 when I started working with my father. We pretty much make everything ourselves. We have 62 hectares in the Douro. Wine has become a real challenge. In the beginning there was only port. Now wine is like 70% of our business. It's very interesting that when we talk about Douro these days, not only in Portugal but worldwide, Douro is the reference of winemaking in Portugal. And when I started in 87, Douro didn't exist. It existed as the base of port, Barca Velha, Quinta do Couto, and that was it. So we're talking about very little red wine was made in those days. And when I started making wine and making some trials, people laughed at me and thought I was crazy, it didn't make sense, it's stupid, and blah, blah, blah. It's so interesting to see the difference. Now, the wine side is not as big as the port, but it's getting there. So, in a way, it's interesting that some people think that the wine is negative or bad for the port, but I think we have to look at it not from the port perspective, but from Douro perspective, because Douro is the area that allows us to make the port. And so we have to think a lot broader, and if we make the Douro region happy financially by making port, of course, which I would make a little bit less, I would make the port a bit more snobbish. I would make it as something really special and not just democratic, and then create some wines in a bigger quantity, some brands, I don't know, 20 brands in a higher volume but not cheap. That would compensate if we make a little bit less port, but make it better and sell it a bit more expensive. And next to that, I think what we have to do is very simple. We have to show the world that the Douro is as good as any other wine area, and we have to make some garage wines. 2,000 bottles, 5,000 bottles, make some limited editions of something which is really, really good. And if we cope those 2-3 things with tourism, high-quality tourism, it's incredible. The sky is the limit. The future of the Douro is guaranteed. The Douro is the most beautiful wine area in the world. Well, okay, politically I cannot say that, but it is. But it's also the hardest. It's the most difficult. It's huge. It's big. It's dramatic. And I think it's really important for the world to come and see how difficult it is to make a vintage port, to make a red Douro wine. And the other thing which is interesting is that it's a big area. We're talking about 45,000 hectares. And one mistake I think my colleagues are making is that they think that the best vineyards for port are the best for red wine. They are not, in my opinion. We have to look for freshness. We have to look for higher altitude, north-facing vineyards. Port seems to like excessive situations. So the best vineyards for port are known. They are usually south-facing at the bottom, and so on and so on. I don't think we need that for a red wine. It needs a stable maturity. So we have to look for other vineyards. So the wine is actually not competing with the port. It's actually helping. Some people say the port is subsidizing the wine. I must confess that I think in the near future it will be the wine subsidizing the port. If we continue to have those supermarket price wars. And let's look back. Sherry made a huge mistake 50 years ago, and they're still paying for it. The port is going a little bit in the same direction. And if we do the same mistakes, we are in trouble. And then it will take another 50 years to come back. So I think it's a stupid political discussions. We have to think. We have to think of the Douro. The Douro is the magnet. The Douro is the area. And so we have to solve the Douro problem, which is not a problem, is a fantastic opportunity. And the sky is the limit. And it looks, for me, very bright if the port trade stops a little bit fighting in supermarket with prices and banalizing the product.
Okay, no, super interesting. And I think what would be helpful for me, and I think it would be really helpful for the listener, is, give us a sense of how you are seeing the port market now. In terms of what's the feedback coming to you from the market? Where are you selling the port? What are the places, the markets that are really sort of getting into the port? I think it would help to really then split out those two products, would help to split out port, and then we'll later go and talk about red wine. But I would like us to focus on port in the first place.
Well, how is the port? The port market is a bit price war on one side, but it's very interesting to notice that a category which was negative in the past, and mostly the English houses were sort of fighting the collators, late bottled tawnies and things like that. And it's interesting that suddenly they stopped fighting the category and they are making it. And it's really positive, the work that they are doing. Very good branding, very good packaging, very good quality. And so I think the port trade is actually going in the right direction, investing in the tawnies, in the collators. Vintage port is our horse that pulls everything. But the tawnies are an amazing thing, and for the gastronomy, for everything, is the future. So I think the port trade is actually going in the right direction. I just think we should not think only about port. We should combine the whole logic about the Douro and the wine, white wine, rosé, tourism and everything. But it looks to me, apart from some wars in the supermarkets, I think the attitude at the moment is actually quite positive. The question is about port. What do we really want? I must confess, I don't like snobism, but I think it's time for port to become a bit snobism. Port is not for everybody, is not for drinking every day. It's a special wine, and I think this is exactly what we should promote. Having said that, while we make maybe the quantity of port in general a bit lower, we compensate that with red wines and white wines and so on. So the future is very simple. By making it the best fortified wine in the world, by promoting something which is unique, and we have enough history to prove it. You name it, you taste a Noval 31, you taste a Coben 27, Taylor's 48, and we're talking about the best wines in the world. And they're not comparable with anything else, and they belong to the elite. And maybe this is what we should be doing, is talking about elite, talking about something which is epic, something which is incredible, something which is outstanding and not comparable. And this is what port is all about. And so we don't need to go and make some fancy schmancy pink port to conquer the world. I think it's a shoot on your feet. It's maybe going to be good for the first few years to increase some sales, but it's not going to help the image of the port. So let's make port the unique something, and then talk about within the Douro there is the best wine in the world, which is port. Mm-hmm. And I think we have a great future for that.
Super interesting already for me to hear you talking about the terroir, how it looks, how dramatic it is, but then also talking about, altitude really. And that's something that I think is, so important in terms of keeping that freshness in, and is what a lot of people are, I think, talking to the markets now. And it's seen as a positive, that they can keep that in. So talk us through a little bit about, take us on a sort of a virtual tour, I guess, of the Douro, and what are you doing, in terms of where are you now planting? What are the sorts of sites that you're planting on? Are they new sites that you're planting for the still wines? Are these sort of places that were in production for port and you're now changing over? Just from through your own eyes, what are the sorts of plots that you're using, and what's being planted there, and to what end?
Well, I'm going to talk about the terroir, taking vintage 2017 as an example. Before the harvest, it looks like a perfect vintage. It was hot, dry, excessive, and then, okay, it could go wrong during the harvest, could rain, it could be too hot and this and that, but it all works very well. But I took all the time in the world and I focused totally on port. And this is a little bit the thing. What does it mean to focus on port? It means to look at the classic vineyards that we know, which are fantastic. But I didn't look for excessive maturation. But the classic port vineyards are, by nature, excessive. And in a year like 2017, in a way they should be excessive, but they were not, because during the harvest it was not totally hot. It was very hot previously. What does that mean for a red wine? It means it's one of those unusual years where it's fantastic for port, but also good for reds, because during the harvest we had time. And so if I have a fantastic vineyard for making vintage port. I just have to wait and get the right moment. And in my case, it's picking earlier than my colleagues because I don't want over-ripeness. But at the same time, in the high-altitude vineyards, in the north-facing vineyards, we have maturity going much slower. And so the acidity, and this is, I think, the key for the greatness of 2017 vintage port, is natural acidity. The wines are fresh. They are huge, they are tannic, they are concentrated, they are monsters in a way, and still there's something silky about them. And the same thing happens a little bit with the red wines. If you have a north-facing vineyard, you could wait. It didn't rain, so there was no danger of raining, so you could just wait, and actually, in my case, I look more for the acidity than the alcohol, and our wines tend to be much lighter and fresher and so on. And so it's a perfect year that in a way doesn't work like that usually, but in 17 it's very good for red wines as well. So what do I look for? I look for lightness in a year that was very hot, and it was possible. Why? Because it was north-facing, because it was a high altitude, and so on. So we're still learning, and as I said before, I think my colleagues, they still think the best vineyards for port are the best for red wine. I think that's a total mistake. I believe in... Douro is huge. It's such a huge area, and because of... high altitude, because of 85 different varieties, because it is such a complicated matter. It's so amazing because we can make some great white wines, and the white wines that are great, they're all made usually from high altitude, some of them on granite soil, even though the Douro is mostly schist. White port is also one matter that has been neglected, but I must remember my father, he always told me, don't worry, every 20, 30 years people plant more and more white, and then they rip it out, and then they plant it again. I don't know. We are quite good in white ports. We don't have many collators white ports, but white port has always been an interesting and serious category for us. And so, again, I think we should think a lot more in white port. There's some companies like Dalva making some really interesting white ports these days, and I think we should think and do more about it. For the white wines, it's very easy. The recipe is quite simple. You go up the mountain, north-facing vineyards. A little bit of granite soil helps because they tend to be more acidic. But this is the amazing thing about the Douro. There is everything there. We just have to really understand it and listen to the nature and do something about it and not impose things. But the sky is the limit. Everything is possible.
Yeah. And it's again, it's super interesting hearing you talk about, I guess working within kind of the parameters, and using what is there. And hearing you talk, my mind immediately went to climate change, and it linked back to the fifth generation, and some of the wisdom, I guess, that has been passed down. Is just curious, under that sort of broader topic of climate change, how much of that wisdom is having to change and is having to adapt to what is a new sort of a new reality for a lot of winemakers in lots of parts of the world, and presumably there in the Douro is no exception.
Well, climate change is obvious. It happens. It's happening. It will happen. I'm not so dramatic about it because we are used to living under dramatic conditions, and so it is maybe a bit more complicated than it was, but it's part of our life. It does make me think about why are certain vineyards planted where they are being, particularly nowadays, planted in particularly dry, hot areas, which I don't believe in those areas for the quality of the wines, but also from the consequences of the climatic changes. It doesn't seem to me like a smart thing, and but that's the way it's going. And then, of course, people talk about irrigation, and this sounds like a very modern recipe of doing things. Is you don't actually do the right thing in the right time in the right place. You do whatever you want, and then you correct it with modern technology and this and that, which is not my way of thinking. Having said that, I think you will hear a lot more from the Baixo Corgo in the Douro, which is a fantastic area, which was neglected because it's maybe not as good for port, but it's probably an amazing, interesting area for red wines, even maybe for white wines. And it's not on the map yet, but it's probably because nobody's taking it as serious as it should be taken, because I think the future of the Douro for red wine is the Baixo Corgo, and surely not the Douro Superior. So it's simple. It's no problem. It's going to be very good. There's lots of interesting terroirs in the Baixo Corgo, and what we are seeing at the moment is that people are getting wild and planting more and more in the Upper Douro, Douro Superior, which is obviously the area where it should not be planted because they will suffer the most from the climatic change. So fashion is more important than climate change. But if you ask me, I don't think that's the future. But that's, at the moment, it's a fashion. Everybody's going to the Upper Douro. As I told you, I think Baixo Corgo is going to be the future of the red wines and possibly white wines. I'm not sure about the white one yet, but there's a huge, huge future. There's a lot to be done, and the vineyards are there. There's old vines. There's everything is there. It's just a question of actually doing it well.
As we are sitting here in Porto, and you've been talking a lot about the Douro, and that's really, where all the grapes are coming from. That's where all the winemaking is happening for the red wines. I'm curious though to then kind of bring us down over into Vila Nova de Gaia, which is where all of the aging takes place for the ports, and I feel it's an area that is not sort of spoken too much about. So I just sort of invite you to give us a bit of a virtual tour of what is happening there, and maybe linking it back to again those 5 generations, and what might have changed significantly over that time.
Well, we're talking about Douro. Douro is the oldest demarcated wine area in the world, 1756. It's incredible. It's a long time ago. It's a lot of history. So we're talking about a wine area which we know what we're talking about in terms of terroir and this and this and that. The other interesting thing is that port is from Douro, but it's actually aged in Vila Nova de Gaia. So there was a lot of discussions until the EU decided that the port houses are not the only ones that can make port, but let's not talk about politics, which I think the EU was right in simplifying the whole process. But it's interesting to note that it's one of the very few areas where the actual aging base of the companies is 150 miles away from the area where the grapes are grown. And so we're talking about Vila Nova de Gaia. there has been, of course, lots of talks. What is better, wine aged in Gaia or in the Douro? I would clearly say that wine aged in Gaia is better, but let's not fundamentalistic talk about it. It's different. A wine aged in the Douro, under the conditions like it used to be, it will be always older, and it will have a bit of rancio and less color, less fruit, less freshness, and so on. The wines in Gaia, because it's much colder, and the cellars are north-facing, and Porto is the second most rainy city, and it's cooler next to the Atlantic and so on. It never has heat peaks of very high temperatures, and so the wines age in a totally different way. And maybe talking about Niepoort, one of the amazing things about my company is that it was we are the only one, I think, I don't know, in the world maybe, where there is a Niepoort company where I'm the fifth generation. My children are the sixth, and there is a fifth generation of Nogueira family, and they have been working consistently next to Niepoort for the last 175 years, and experience, knowledge, empiric knowledge, is really one of the essences of what I do. I'm not trying to change the world or revolutionize anything, no. What I'm trying to do is learn from the old. And this family is very important. Senor José, the third generation, he's not with us anymore. He's someone I spend a lot of time, and I think he taught me a lot of things, and maybe one of the most important things is patience. Patience, time. Don't be young and nervous. Hey, calm down. With port, it takes time. With the fourth generation, I've learned a lot. I get along very well, and Zezé is still part of the team, and we do the blendings. His son is part of the team. So there is empiric logic, knowledge, which is not the same thing as what you learn in school or in your university. And I think what Niepoort is all about is a compensation of the two. I have winemakers working with us who know everything, they studied everything, but at the same time I have old-fashioned logic. And what I want to do and what I think Niepoort is all about is a combination of the old and the young. Today we have too many machines, the sky is the limit, we can do everything. But the philosophy of Niepoort is less is more. So we do have the possibilities, we do have the machines possibly, but it's not about using them. It's about doing nothing and respecting the vineyards above everything. And the wisdom of the old. And this is, I think, the secret of Niepoort. This is the secret of the vintage 2017. There's a lot of little details that make the difference. It's from before the harvest, I could tell this could be a great year. Okay, it could go wrong if it rained, if, but it didn't. So the harvest presented itself perfect. It was not too hot. It was even cold at night after being very, very hot. And so we had time to do whatever we wanted, and I focused totally on the ports. And then there's little things you can do. You can press the must double, which is something unheard of, and it's stupid, and it's a pain in the ass, and it's a lot of work for 100 liters. But you have 100 liters that make a huge difference. Picking at the right time. I started making wines in some other places to make sure that where the great wines were made, I didn't have the pressure of having to, press quickly or anything. So I think, like everything in life, it's the little things that make the big difference.
as we are lucky enough to be, again, sat here in Porto, and even to have a cask sample of the 2017 here in front of us, I think it'd be remiss of me to, not ask you to, I guess, respond sensorially to it, to kind of talk us through what you see, what you smell, and what you taste in this 2017 here.
Well, I have a problem. I'm very emotional about this wine. I think this is the best thing I have made. But don't take me too serious, because I said the same thing about 15, 11, and 2005. But still, I think this is bloody good. And I do get very emotional about it because, this is close to perfection, whatever that means. It's a wine. Okay, yes, we are talking about a port, but it's not alcoholic. It has sexy tannins. It has amazing tannins. It's really a very concentrated wine with big tannins, but at the same time, it's not really aggressive. It's not really fruity, which is good. I don't like too fruity wines, so it's a bit austere. It's a bit of ugly in the nose. You have to go into it. It's not something that jumps at you. You have to go there. And if you go there, you get rewarded. It does give you the balance again. It has austerity. It has it's spicy. It's rich. And there is one amazing thing about it, is that when you put it in your mouth, it's generous, it's huge, it's big, and a bit sweet. But then suddenly there's a broom, something which is tannin, acidity, which cleans out your mouth. And in the end, you just want to chew on it, but it's not a sticky wine. It's not sweet. It's not negative in sweetness. It's actually, it almost hurts you a little bit. It's dry, it's tannic, it's austere. And Robert Mondavi once taught me that a great sweet wine is dry in the finish. I must confess, at the time I didn't understand what the fuck he was talking about. But there was something that over the time I understood, and this is the balance I'm looking in the wines, is that you can chew on it, it's dry, and this wine is forever. So it's like a 45 now, maybe. I don't know. I don't know how the 45 tasted when they were young, but I wish I could taste it.
Yeah, and I think, again, I think it's super fascinating that we've really zeroed in on the 17, and I think having tasted this, and earlier, I would kind of like encourage you to share what you were talking about earlier, just in terms of ideal drinking age, because you're talking earlier about the sort of the curve of the approachability in the early years, and then maybe less so through the sort of 10, 15, and then coming back. What is the 17 doing now, and what might it do in the future?
Vintage port is a classic wine and it behaves a little bit like certain Bordeaux do. It's a wine that it's fantastic when it's young. So the first 5, 7, 10 years, depends on the vintage. It's incredible for its youth and its balance within the youth. Then it closes down, and it becomes a little bit of a pain in the ass. You can't do anything about it. It's neither fruity nor this nor that. And then it comes out of the cave and becomes better and better and better and better and better. It depends on the vintage. 83s are fantastic now, but they will get better. The 70s are getting better and better, but they have been good for a while. 77's still closed. It depends really on the vintage, but I don't think this wine will close down that dramatically. But what do I know? we will have to wait and see.
Kind of encourage you to take a different tack now, because I've, as you see, I've written lots and lots of notes here, and these are things and hooks that I'm sort of interested in and curious about, really. And one of them was around the winemaking style, and the thing you spoke about in terms of patience being important, about technology, making your life easier and not totally ignoring technology that's available, then also empirical knowledge and I guess learned wisdom. And I guess where I'm going with it really is, again, thinking about the listener and somebody who's, I guess, at the start of their winemaking journey, or maybe hasn't even begun their winemaking journey. What are the sorts of experiences that you think are important in getting to the place where you're able to kind of integrate these things? What are the sorts of things that you think any sort of young up and coming winemaker should be looking to do, and should be looking to acquire in terms of experience, but equally technology, empirical knowledge, and patience as well?
Well, this is how important is this and that in winemaking and so on and so on. It's a little bit like English. To speak English is easy, relatively speaking. To really speak English and understand the English, it's almost impossible. And I think the Portuguese have an advantage because we understand your humor and we understand this double meaning and so on and so on. Making wine or port in the Douro, making port is very easy. It's like English. To make a great vintage port is bloody difficult. So there is a lot of nuances, second meanings, little things, little details, attention to terroir, and so on and so on. I must confess, we live now in a world where technology is more important. Winemakers are heroes. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in machines. I believe that machines are here to help us, but they don't make miracles. What makes miracles is the terroir and the knowledge where are the vineyards and how to do about them in an old-fashioned way. And so making a great vintage port is attention to detail, attention to the vineyard. The vineyards makes the difference. And I go back to what I said before, is my philosophy is a bit less is more, because it's not the machines, it's not money, it's not, no. In reality, it's empiric knowledge, it's the old people, little details that make the huge difference. And that's what is about the vintage 2017 Niepoort is a concentration of details from the old people, not from machines or anything modern. And less is more. A young winemaker, but if he comes out of university, he's spoiled and he knows everything. So the first thing he should learn is to listen and to taste some old wines and go and try to understand how were those wines made and why are they so good. But most young winemakers don't do that. They know everything. So learning in university is obviously technologically speaking very good, but listening to the old people is something which is really important. And let's face it, when the old people are not here anymore, the wisdom goes away. If nobody learns from them, it will disappear. I learned a lot from the third generation. I learned a lot from my father, and my duty is to pass on what I have learned to the next generation and to the next generation of the Nogueira family that is working with us. But this is not a very common modern thing. People know everything, they don't listen. So listening is very important.
It genuinely feels like there's wealth that we could sort of talk about, and I perhaps could have extracted more out of you in certain areas, and but I certainly do want to leave the door open to doing a follow up sometime in the Douro Valley itself, and actually seeing these things with my own eyes, which I haven't had the opportunity to as of yet. So I'd kind of leave the interview in my kind of classic style, really, and just ask you to look into the future, really. You can potentially be a bit speculative, or keep it sort of fairly short term in terms of what you got coming up next. But yeah, just what have you got coming up in the future that you're particularly excited about?
I'm the happiest person on earth at the moment. I'm very happy with 2017, but no, I think what I'm maybe most happy about, possibly, is the future of Portugal. I think Portugal is living on a great wave, Douro in particular, but I think Portugal in general. And if we Portuguese take it serious and invest in making everything better and better and better, Portugal is going to be on the map, which I think at the moment Portugal is getting on the map, and the future of Portugal is extremely bright, and it's bright because of the wines, yes, but also the food, gastronomy, chefs, authentic, local, easygoing food. We have a culture in Portugal of eating. It's not a question of going into expensive restaurants. Anybody can go anytime to a restaurant, and you can eat for little money and have a glass of wine and have a fantastic food. Simple. We have stars, cooks as well. And there is a lot of little ways to go ahead and make it better, and so tourism is part of it. And let's face it, Portugal is a very small country, but it's incredibly unique. It is very different from area to area, talking about wines, for instance, and we have the best fish in the world. So the variety of things in Portugal is maybe not as big as in other countries, but what we do have is outstanding, and the sky is the limit again, and I believe Portugal has a great future.
Thank you so much, Dirk. An absolute pleasure to sit down with you in Porto, and I hope we can continue the conversation in the Douro Valley at some point. Do see below for website and main social media handles for Niepoort Vinhos. And if you'd like to share this fascinating episode, the correct link is interpretingwine.com/Dirk19. If you're new to Interpreting Wine, then welcome, and I'd love to have you subscribing and listening along. Just head to interpretingwine.com/listen for all the details. A huge thank you once again to Dia and for Dirk for your help in putting together the series. Between you, you've certainly whet my appetite for covering Port more in the future, and I hope that I can pick up the coverage on Interpreting Wine very soon. See you next time.